Told you that struggling to lift a tiny 10-pound pink dumbbell to the point of absolute exhaustion could build exactly as much muscle as breaking your back under a massive 300-pound barbell.
I mean, it sounds like complete heresy to anyone who has spent, any time in a commercial gym.
Oh, absolutely. It goes against everything we're taught.
But the clinical data on that is absolute staggering. We are looking at a complete upending of the way we understand physical adaptation.
So today we are tearing up decades of gym bro dogma. If you've ever stood on the rubberized floor of a gym, surrounded by clanking metal, people grunting, and row after row of alien-looking machinery, and just thought, what actually works? Well, this deep dive is for you.
And we have a massive stack of clinical sports science sources sitting right here to answer that. We're breaking down a comprehensive 8-step, client-centered exercise prescription model.
Right, and we should clarify, this isn't just about getting shredded. We are looking at the literal operating manual for the human machine.
Exactly. Whether you are a 16-year-old athlete trying to get faster or an 80-year-old trying to maintain the balance to catch yourself if you trip.
The biological laws we are going to explore today dictate every single movement you make. And the foundational law governing all of this, the concept our sources emphasize before we even touch a weight, is a principle called specificity.
Specificity is everything. I mean, the human body is highly literal. It is essentially a blind adaptation machine.
A blind adaptation machine. I like that.
Yeah, because it doesn't know what a dumbbell is. It doesn't know what a treadmill or a yoga mat is.
Right? It can't see the equipment.
Exactly. It only understands the specific mechanical and metabolic demands placed upon it, and then it will adapt specifically to survive those exact demands the next time they occur.
Okay, let's ground that a bit. The body is literal. It doesn't care about my New Year's resolution to look better in a t-shirt, right?
Not even a little bit. It just says, we are repeatedly picking up a heavy thing that taxes our forearms and back. I guess you need to synthesize new tissue in the forearms and back so the stress doesn't kill us tomorrow.
That is the perfect way to look at it.
Yeah.
The training benefit perfectly mirrors the nature of the training stress.
Yeah. If you want bone density, you need impact and load. If you want speed, you have to force the nervous system to fire rapidly.
You have to manipulate the variables, the weight, the rest, the angle, to trick the body into forcing that exact adaptation.
But before we even get to the weights, I mean, these sources read like a medical textbook. Isometric, isotonic, concentric.
The vocabulary is pretty dense.
It is. But if we don't understand the underlying language of how a muscle actually works, none of the equipment matters.
So let's start at the microscopic level. When I decide to pick up my coffee mug, what is physically happening in my arm?
Well, we have to look at the mechanisms of muscle contraction. Deep inside your muscle fibers, there are these tiny filaments called actin and myosin.
Actin and myosin, okay.
Imagine them like two sets of combs facing each other. When your brain sends a neurological signal to contract, the myosin filaments reach out, grab the actin filaments, and pull them closer together.
Oh, so they kind of interlock and slide past each other.
Exactly. And millions of these tiny microscopic pulls happening simultaneously are what generate force.
So strength is really just the maximum force those millions of little cross bridges can generate at once.
Yes, but that force can be exerted in different environments. And that brings us to the vocabulary. We have isometric strength and we have isotonic strength.
Let's break those down. What does isometric mean?
Well, iso meaning same and metric meaning length. An isometric contraction means the muscle generates massive force, but the joint angle never changes.
Like pushing your car when it's stuck in the mud, but it won't budge.
Right. You are applying maximum force, your face is turning red, your muscles are burning, but nothing is moving. The muscle length stays the exact same.
But you're still exhausting yourself.
Oh, the biological cost of that is still very high. Your body is burning ATP, which is the cellular energy currency, at a rapid rate. But because nothing moves, we call it isometric.
Okay, so then isotonic must be when things actually move.
Exactly. Isotonic involves joint movement. The muscle generates force while the joint angle actively changes. And that's what we do in 99% of our daily lives.
And when things start moving, that's where the sources break it down into two phases, right? Concentric and eccentric.
Yeah. I think everyone who has ever lowered a heavy box to the floor has felt this, even if they don't know the clinical terms.
Let's use a bicep curl as a visual.
Good example. So when you hold a dumbbell down by your side and curl it up toward your shoulder, the muscle is shortening as it overcomes the resistance of gravity.
Those actin and myosin filaments are successfully sliding past one another.
Right. That is the concentric phase. You are overcoming the resistance.
But What goes up must come down.
And that descent is the eccentric phase. As you slowly lower that dumbbell back to your side, your bicep doesn't just turn off.
Right, if it did, your arm would drop like a stone and you'd probably tear a tendon.
Exactly. The bicep is still working frantically. It is exerting force, but the overall length of the muscle is elongating.
I always like to think of the eccentric phase like braking a car when you are going down a really steep hill.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, you're yielding to gravity, moving in the direction gravity wants you to go, but you are still applying massive force to the brakes so you don't crash into a tree.
To take your car analogy a step further, think about what happens to those brake pads when you ride them hard down a mountain.
They get incredibly hot and they wear down.
Yes, they suffer physical wear and tear. And the exact same thing happens at the cellular level during an eccentric contraction.
Wait, really?
Yeah, because fewer muscle fibers are recruited to handle the braking load, the physical stress on those individual fibers is massive. They suffer microscopic tears.
So when I wake up 2 days after a workout and I can barely lift my arms over my head, that soreness isn't from lifting the weight up, it's from the braking.
Almost entirely, yes. That delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS, is primarily the inflammatory response to the microtrauma caused by that eccentric lengthening under tension.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
But there's another concept here in the language of movement that I don't think the average gym goer has ever heard of.
Which one?
The kinetic chain. The sources talk about open versus closed kinetic chain exercises, and apparently it dictates every single exercise we do.
Oh, absolutely. It comes down to what the end of your limb is doing.
Okay, what is a closed kinetic chain?
A closed kinetic chain exercise means the distal end of your body, so your foot or your hand, is in fixed solid contact with the ground or a machine platform.
So like a standard barbell squat? My feet are planted heavily on the floor.
Right. When you lower your body, the forces begin at the ground and work their way up through the ankle, then the knee, and then the hip joints. The chain of movement is closed at the bottom.
Why does my nervous system care if my foot is planted or moving? I mean, muscle is just muscle, right?
Actually, your nervous system cares immensely. When your foot is firmly planted in a closed chain movement, your brain receives immense sensory feedback from the ground.
I'm just feeling the pressure.
Exactly. And it forces a synchronized co-contraction of agonist and antagonist muscles across multiple joints.
Meaning everything fires at once.
Yeah. In a squat, your quads, hamstrings, glutes, and calves are all forced to negotiate the load together to keep you from falling over.
So what is an open chain then?
An open kinetic chain exercise would be sitting on a machine and kicking your legs out against a padded bar, like a seated leg extension.
Because your feet are free to move through the air.
Right. The chain is open.
It's basically the difference between pushing the floor away from your body versus kicking your foot out into empty space.
Yes. And clinically, this changes everything about the prescription. Open chain exercises are phenomenal for isolating a specific muscle, like the quadriceps.
Because the lower back or glutes don't get involved?
Exactly. But if you are training a hockey player or even an elderly person trying to improve their walking gait, they need coordinated power starting from the ground up.
They need the whole system to work together.
Yeah, they need their nervous system to practice managing forces across multiple joints simultaneously. So they require closed kinetic chain work.
Okay, so if I know how muscles contract, and I know the difference between planting my feet and moving my feet in space, does it matter what I am actually holding in my hands?
Ah, the equipment debate.
Yeah, because if you spend 5 minutes on fitness forums, there is a tribal war between free weight purists and people who use the fancy machines. Does the body actually care if I'm grabbing a piece of iron, pulling a cable, or balancing on a circus ball?
Well, the clinical data strips all the emotion out of that debate. Our sources look at this purely through the lens of utility.
Meaning every tool has a purpose.
Right. Every piece of equipment has a specific biomechanical cost and a specific benefit. Let's look at free weights first. Dumbbells, barbells, kettlebells.
What's their main advantage?
Their primary advantage is unlimited freedom of movement. You aren't locked into a predetermined track.
But freedom has a cost.
Right.
If the barbell isn't attached to a track, my body has to become the track.
That is the exact neurological cost of free weights. And it is a steep one.
How so?
When you perform a dumbbell bench press, your chest and triceps are the primary movers pushing the weight up. But because the dumbbells want to wobble in every direction, dozens of tiny stabilizing muscles are firing frantically.
Like in your rotator cuff and core.
Exactly. They are firing just to keep the weight balanced.
So you are getting a more comprehensive stimulus overall.
You are. Free weights force the development of stabilizer muscles, which translates incredibly well to real-world, three-dimensional movement.
But there's a downside.
The major disadvantage is the learning curve and the injury risk. For a total beginner, their nervous system is so overwhelmed just trying not to drop the dumbbell on their face that they often can't generate enough force to actually fatigue the target muscle.
The balance fails before the muscle does. That makes sense. Which is exactly why machines exist, right? The safe, guided, tracked equipment.
Yes. Machines isolate. That is their superpower. They entirely remove the demand for balance from the central nervous system.
I sit down, push the handles, and the machine dictates the path.
Right, because you don't have to worry about stabilizing a wobbly weight. A beginner can safely push a target muscle group, like the pectorals, to absolute failure.
But I can already see the freeway purists rolling their eyes, arguing that machines aren't, functional.
And from a strictly athletic standpoint, the purists aren't wrong. A chest press machine does not teach your body how to coordinate power from your legs, through your core, and out through your arms.
Because it artificially stabilizes you.
Exactly. If a football lineman only trains on machines, he'll be strong, but the second he steps on a chaotic three-dimensional field, his central nervous system won't know how to stabilize that strength.
So the answer to the great gym debate is really just, who is the client?
Bingo.
If you are a 60-year-old beginner who just needs to safely stimulate your thigh muscles to protect your knees, a leg press machine is a godsend.
Yes, and if you are a volleyball player needing to transfer power from the floor to a spike, you need the chaotic nature of free weights.
But the equipment manufacturers understand this gap, and our sources highlight an incredible piece of biomechanical engineering designed to optimize machines. The variable resistance cams.
Oh, these are fascinating.
I've seen these. They are the weird kind of kidney bean-shaped pulleys on the side of weight stacks. Most people just ignore them. What are they actually doing to the weight?
To understand the cam, we have to understand the physics of a human joint. A muscle's force production is not constant throughout a movement.
Let's go back to the bicep curl.
Okay, when your arm is hanging straight down, your mechanical leverage is terrible. The weight feels incredibly heavy.
Right.
As you curl it up to about 90 degrees, your leverage optimizes. Your muscle is at its strongest there. But as you finish the curl near your shoulder, the leverage drops off again.
Yeah, if I hold a 20-pound dumbbell, it feels like 20 pounds at the bottom, maybe 10 pounds in the middle when I have leverage, and 20 pounds again at the top.
And that is the flaw of gravity. The dumbbell doesn't change its mass to accommodate your shifting leverage. You are always limited by your weakest point in the range of motion.
So if you can only lift 20 pounds at the weakest joint angle, your muscle isn't being fully challenged during its strongest joint angle.
Exactly. Enter the kidney bean pulley.
Enter the cam.
As you pull the handle on a variable resistance machine, the cable wraps around this irregularly shaped cam. As the cam rotates, its shape physically changes the moment arm the leverage of the weight stack.
Wait, so it dynamically alters the resistance while you move?
Yes. It makes the 20 pounds feel like 15 pounds where you are weak, and artificially magnifies it to feel like 30 pounds in the middle where you are strong.
That is brilliant physics. It perfectly maps the weight to the human strength curve. The muscle gets maximum tension at every single millimeter of the movement.
It is brilliant. Now, the limitation is that the cam is manufactured for the average human strength curve, and, well, individual biomechanics vary. But it creates a vastly more efficient fatigue stimulus than a stagnant iron plate.
Okay, so we've covered gravity and iron. But the sources dive into alternative forms of resistance that sound like they belong in an auto mechanics shop. Hydraulics and pneumatics.
Yes, things get really interesting here.
What happens when we strip gravity out of the equation entirely?
This completely alters the biological response. Traditional weights provide constant mass. Hydraulics and pneumatics provide fluid and gas resistance.
Let's look at hydraulics first. They use cylinders of compressed oil or water, right?
Right. And the mechanical difference is accommodating resistance.
What does that mean?
With a dumbbell, if you push it really hard, momentum takes over. The weight flies up and your muscles actually stop working for a split second while the iron coasts upward.
You're just kind of throwing it.
Exactly. But with a hydraulic cylinder, the harder and faster you push, the more the fluid resists you. You literally cannot use momentum.
But the sources note something wild about hydraulics. They offer concentric work. What does that mean?
Think about a hydraulic chest press machine. You push the handles away from you to work your chest. That is a concentric contraction.
Normally, gravity would pull the handles back, and you would eccentrically break the weight on the way down.
Right, but hydraulics don't use gravity. When you finish the push, the handles just stay there. To get them back to the starting position, you physically have to pull them toward you against the fluid resistance.
Oh, wow. So you push the handles to work your chest, and then you pull the same handles to work your back.
Yes. Both the agonist and the antagonist muscles are working concentrically. You are overcoming resistance in both directions.
And because gravity isn't pulling anything back down, there is absolutely zero eccentric lengthening.
None at all.
Wait, if there is no eccentric phase, no braking, does that mean there's no muscle soreness?
That is the clinical revelation right there. Because the eccentric phase is responsible for the massive microtrauma and subsequent delayed onset muscle soreness, hydraulic training virtually eliminates STOMS.
You're kidding. You can train a client extremely hard and they won't wake up crippled with soreness the next day.
They won't. It is a fantastic onboarding tool for beginners who usually quit after the first week because everything hurts.
That sounds like a miracle.
It's great, but the caveat is that the real world is heavily eccentric. Every time you walk down a flight of stairs, your quads are absorbing massive eccentric forces.
So if you never train eccentrically, your tissues won't develop the structural resilience to handle daily life impacts.
Exactly. You need both.
What about pneumatics? How does compressed air differ from compressed oil?
Pneumatics do allow for eccentric returns, so they build that structural resilience. But their real superpower is the complete eradication of inertia. Yeah. If you load up a barbell with 200 pounds and try to explode upward as fast as humanly possible, the sheer inertia of that iron can violently snap your joints at the end of the movement. It is incredibly dangerous to move heavy iron at maximum velocity.
Why does this matter, though? Who needs to move resistance at maximum velocity?
Think of an 80-year-old listener. When an elderly person trips on a rug, they don't need absolute strength to get back up slowly.
Right. They need to stop the fall.
Exactly. They need explosive power to throw their leg out in a fraction of a second to catch their fall. We lose power, the speed of force, much faster than we lose absolute strength as we age.
And pneumatics fix that.
Yes. Pneumatic machines allow an elderly client or an elite sprinter to push against heavy resistance at absolute maximum velocity safely, because compressed air has no physical mass.
There is no heavy iron plate flying upward to crash back down on their joints.
You got it. It's all about picking the right tool for the specific adaptation.
Speaking of which, the sources mention using instability like standing on a squishy BOSU ball or a balance board. You see people doing bicep curls on one leg on a wobbly surface, and it looks completely ridiculous. Is there clinical merit to that?
Well, the science of instability training is often vastly misunderstood in commercial gyms.
I can imagine.
The core premise is that unstable surfaces increase muscular activity in lieu of increasing mechanical load.
Meaning you can torture the muscles without needing a heavy weight.
Correct. When you stand on a rigid floor to do a shoulder press, your spine is relatively secure. But if you sit on an inflated exercise ball and try to do the same shoulder press, the platform beneath you is actively trying to roll away.
So your whole core goes into panic mode.
Yeah, suddenly the deep stabilizing muscles of your core, the multifidus in your spine, the transverse abdominis, they have to fire relentlessly just to maintain your center of gravity.
You are taxing the stabilizers heavily, but the trade-off is you can't lift as much weight for the main muscle.
Exactly. Actually, let me build on that. That is the critical trade-off. If your goal is to build massive, powerful shoulders, standing on a wobbly ball is a terrible idea.
Because the balance demand forces you to use incredibly light weights.
Yeah.
You rob the shoulder of its required mechanical stress.
Right. But if your goal is rehabilitation, proprioception, or waking up dormant core muscles to protect the spine without loading it with heavy barbells, instability devices are phenomenal tools.
Okay, so I have a dumbbell, a pneumatic machine, and a wobbly ball. But just standing in a gym holding a tool isn't a workout. I need an architecture.
Yes, the programming.
If we look at the clinical model, we have to select the training method and the order of performance. Does it matter which exercise I do first, or is muscle fatigue just muscle fatigue?
Oh, how you structure the fatigue dictates the entire physiological outcome. Let's look at how we string sets together. The sources detail several advanced systems designed to manipulate metabolic stress.
Let's start with supersets versus compound sets. I see people hogging 3 different machines at once in the gym, leaving their towels everywhere, claiming they are doing a superset.
We've all seen that.
But looking at these clinical notes, I think the vast majority of gym goers are using the terminology completely wrong. What is the clinical difference?
The terminology is absolutely butchered in the mainstream, let's clarify. A superset system involves performing 2 distinct exercises consecutively with virtually 0 rest in between.
Okay.
But the biological key is that the 2 exercises must target antagonistic or opposing muscle groups.
So doing a bench press for the chest and then immediately jumping up and doing a barbell row for the back.
Yes. And the rationale here is deeply efficient. When your chest and anterior deltoids are actively contracting to push the bar up, your nervous system automatically sends a signal to your back muscles to relax.
Oh, so they don't fight each other.
Exactly, allowing the movement to happen. This is called reciprocal inhibition.
So while I'm crushing my chest, my back is actually getting a neurologically mandated rest period.
Precisely, rather. That is the exact mechanism. By the time you finish the chest press and switch to the back row, your back is fresh and ready to fire, and your chest gets to rest.
It allows you to dramatically condense the time of your workout without sacrificing the quality of the force output.
That's the beauty of a true superset.
Okay, then what is a compound set? Because people use that word interchangeably.
A compound set, or a triset if you use 3 exercises, also uses 0 rest. But it targets the exact same muscle group.
Wait, so doing a heavy barbell bench press, immediately dropping to the floor to do push-ups, and then immediately doing cable flies, all for the chest.
Yes, you are hammering the same localized tissue from multiple biomechanical angles without allowing the blood to leave or the ATP to replenish.
Why on earth would you do that to yourself? That sounds like metabolic torture.
It kind of is. It's designed to induce extreme localized muscular endurance and massive metabolic stress.
Like getting a massive pump.
Yeah, when you trap the blood in the muscle and force it to keep firing through intense fatigue and lactic acid buildup, you trigger very specific hormonal responses, including the release of growth hormone.
Wow.
But it is highly advanced, incredibly taxing, and usually used by bodybuilders trying to break through a stubborn hypertrophy plateau. It is not for a beginner.
Good to know. Another time saver the sources mention is circuit weight training. Moving from station to station with a stopwatch.
Circuits are the ultimate hybrid approach. You design a loop of, say, 8 to 12 stations, alternating upper body, lower body, and core.
Using moderate resistance.
Right, maybe 40 to 60% of your maximum, and you perform 10 to 15 reps. But the clinical variable you are manipulating is the rest period. You only allow 15 to 30 seconds of transition time between stations.
Your heart rate never drops.
Exactly. It creates a sustained cardiovascular demand. While you aren't going to build elite absolute strength or run a marathon purely off-circuit training, it provides a very effective simultaneous adaptation for both moderate strength and aerobic endurance.
It seems highly prescribed for general population clients who only have 45 minutes on their lunch break to get the most metabolic bang for their buck.
Yes, it's perfect for that.
Okay, we've talked about strength and endurance architectures, but I want to talk about power, because the physics of power detailed here is fascinating. The sources dive into plyometrics.
Ah, plyometrics.
If I had to use an analogy, plyometrics is like pulling back a rubber band and letting it snap.
That is fundamentally the biological mechanism at play. To understand plyometrics, we have to look at something called the stretch shortening cycle.
Let's break that down.
So muscle isn't just contracting tissue, it is intertwined with tendons and fascia, which have highly elastic properties.
So they literally behave like a rubber band.
They do. When you rapidly force a muscle into an eccentric stretch, say you step off a small box and land on the ground, the sudden deceleration forces your calf and quad muscles to lengthen quickly. That rapid stretch stores immense kinetic energy in the elastic components of the tissue. Furthermore, your nervous system has safety sensors called muscle spindles.
What does this do?
When they detect a sudden, violent stretch, they panic. They send an emergency signal to the spinal cord that says, contract immediately before the muscle tears.
So you have the physical elastic energy of the stretched tissue, plus a panicked reflex contraction from the nervous system happening at the exact same time.
Exactly. When you combine those two forces, the resulting concentric contraction, the jump back up into the air, is vastly more powerful than if you had just stood still and tried to jump.
That is the stretch shortening cycle. It is how athletes generate explosive, instantaneous power.
Yes, but the analogy of the rubber band has a catch.
Okay, what is it?
If I pull a rubber band back and just hold it there for 10 seconds and then let it go, it still snaps, right?
Yeah.
But the sources say if you pause during a plyometric movement, you lose everything. Because human tissue is not just rubber, it has thermodynamic properties.
Meaning heat.
Yeah. If you step off that box, land, and pause in a squat position for even 1 full second, the stored elastic energy in the tendons dissipates as heat. It literally warms up the tissue and vanishes.
Oh, wow.
And the muscle spindle reflex also turns off once the stretch stops. To harness the power of plyometrics, the transition from the eccentric stretch to the concentric contraction must be instantaneous. Milliseconds matter.
Hitting the brakes and immediately slamming the gas. But this sounds incredibly demanding on the joints.
It is arguably the most neurologically and mechanically taxing method in the clinical toolkit. The sources mandate extensive warm-ups and caution that the moment the athlete's ground contact time slows down, the moment they lose that instantaneous snap, the set must end immediately to prevent tendon rupture or joint injury.
Which brings us to the logistics of a workout. Exercise order.
Very important.
If I walk into the gym and I know I want to do heavy barbell squats, plyometric jumps, some calf raises, and some bicep curls, where do I start?
The sequencing of exercises is paramount to preventing premature failure. The golden rule established in our sources is multi-joint, large muscle mass exercises must precede single joint, small muscle mass exercises.
So squats before calf raises. Bench press before tricep extensions. Why? Is it just because I have more energy at the beginning?
It's about fatigue management and protecting the weak links in the kinetic chain. Let's use your bench press example again.
Okay.
A heavy bench press requires massive force from the pectorals in your chest, but it absolutely relies on the smaller triceps muscles to extend the elbow and lock the weight out.
Right, the triceps are the assisting muscles.
If you walk into the gym and decide to exhaust your triceps first by doing heavy cable pushdowns, those tiny muscles are fully depleted.
So when I move to the bench press,
Your chest might be completely fresh and ready to lift 200 pounds, but halfway up, your exhausted triceps will simply give out.
you fail to lift, not because your chest was fully stimulated, but because the assisting weak link collapsed.
Exactly. You robbed the large muscle of its requisite training stress.
And the same logic applies to the core muscles, right? The sources strictly warn against doing heavy abdominal work at the beginning of a session.
Think about the biological role of the core. It is the transmission that transfers power between the upper and lower body, and it acts as a rigid corset to protect the spine.
So if I do a bunch of crunches first,
If you perform intense abdominal circuits and fatigue the multifidus and the transverse abdominis, those muscles lose their ability to contract forcefully.
and then I put a heavy barbell on my back to perform a squat,
Your compromised core will buckle, your spine will flex under load, and you risk a catastrophic disc herniation. Stabilizers and small assisting muscles must always be trained last.
okay, we know how to order the workout, we understand the tools, we know how to pair the sets, but now we have to talk about the weight on the bar.
This is the big one.
And this is the section of the sources that blew my mind. This is the paradigm shift that defies everything I've ever been told by a personal trainer. Let's look at setting intensity and volume.
The clinical data we are about to discuss has fundamentally fractured decades of established strength and conditioning dogma.
Because the universally accepted rule, the absolute gospel of the gym has always been, if you want to cause hypertrophy, if you want your muscles to grow larger, you have to lift heavy.
Right. The standard metric is that you must load the bar with at least 70 to 80% of your 1 repetition maximum, your 1 RM.
The belief was that heavy mechanical load was the primary non-negotiable trigger for recruiting high-threshold motor units, right?
Yes, and stimulating muscle protein synthesis. Light weights, it was believed, were strictly for localized muscular endurance and would never cause a muscle to grow in cross-sectional area.
But the sources highlight a 2012 study out of Canada by Bird and colleagues that completely detonates that assumption. Walk us through this experiment.
The researchers set up a brilliantly simple comparison. They took subjects and had them train their legs. One protocol used the traditional heavy dogma, lifting 80% of their 1 RM.
A weight so heavy they could only manage maybe 5 to 8 repetitions before failing?
The classic strength and hypertrophy zone.
Yeah.
The second protocol used an incredibly light weight, just 30% of their 1 RM. A weight so light, most gym goers wouldn't even count it as a warm-up.
But there was one critical catch.
There was. The subjects lifting the 30% weight could not stop at 10 reps. They had to lift that tiny weight continuously until they reached absolute voluntary fatigue.
Meaning the muscle physically could not complete another repetition.
Right. It might take 25, 30, or 35 reps, but they had to go to failure.
And the outcome. How did the biology respond to the heavy anvil versus the pink dumbbell?
The researchers took muscle biopsies and measured the actual synthesis of new muscle proteins.
Yeah.
The results showed that the lightweight 30% 1RM protocol taken to fatigue stimulated new muscle protein synthesis to a degree that was entirely similar to the heavy 80% 1RM protocol.
That is staggering. The amount of new muscle built was effectively identical.
Effectively identical.
So the actual mass of the object in your hands doesn't matter. What is the body actually sensing if it's not measuring the pounds on the bar?
The body is measuring neurological effort and motor unit recruitment. To understand this, we need to quickly look at how muscle fibers are recruited. It's a concept known as the size principle.
Give me the sort of basic version of the size principle.
Your nervous system is basically a highly efficient, lazy accountant. It doesn't want to spend energy. It doesn't have to.
Okay.
When you pick up a 30% weight, the nervous system only recruits the small, slow-twitch type I muscle fibers. They are highly aerobic and don't fatigue easily.
So the big, powerful type 2 fast twitch fibers are just sitting there relaxing.
Exactly. Well, they remain dormant initially, but as you keep lifting that light weight rep after rep, those slow twitch fibers begin to exhaust and fail.
So the lazy accountant has to do something.
Right. The accountant realizes we are losing force. I need to hire more workers. So the nervous system is forced to recruit larger and larger motor units.
I see.
By the time you reach rep 25 and you are gritting your teeth, struggling to move that 30% weight, your nervous system has recruited the massive, fast twitch type 2 fibers just to keep the weight moving.
So by taking this set to absolute fatigue, you recruited the exact same spectrum of muscle fibers as you would have if you just lifted the 80% weight from the start.
Precisely. Effort is the great equalizer. Pushing to the point of unfamiliar fatigue is the sole biological trigger for growth.
Why does this matter for the listener? Why is this such a massive breakthrough?
Because heavy mechanical loads are incredibly damaging to the joints, ligaments, and tendons over time.
That makes sense.
If we have a 50-year-old listener who wants to build muscle mass to protect their metabolism, but they have arthritis in their knees or a previously herniated disc, the idea of putting a 250-pound barbell on their back is terrifying and dangerous.
But this data proves they don't have to.
Right. They can use light, joint-friendly weights, and as long as they have the mental fortitude to push that light weight to absolute muscular fatigue, they will receive the exact same hypertrophic adaptation without the shearing stress on their joints.
It democratizes muscle growth.
Uh-huh.
But the sources don't stop at weight. They also look at speed.
Yes, velocity.
There is another 2012 study by Muhammad et al. That looks at how velocity changes the adaptation.
Yes, Muhammad compared traditional, heavy, slow lifting with low-load, high-velocity lifting.
Meaning taking a lighter weight, but moving it concentrically as fast and explosively as physically possible.
Exactly. And again, the results defy the heavyweight dogma.
How so?
The low-load, high-velocity training offered similar hypertrophic benefits, specifically in the type 2 muscle fibers.
Wait, if the weight is light and they aren't going to exhaustion of 30 reps, how does moving it fast trigger the big fibers?
It comes down to the physics equation for power. Power equals force times velocity. If the weight is low, but you make the velocity, the speed of movement incredibly high, the overall power output required from the muscle is massive.
So to move an object instantly, the nervous system bypasses the lazy accountant entirely.
Right. It immediately recruits the fast twitch type 2 fibers because slow twitch fibers literally cannot contract fast enough to generate that speed.
Plus, if you throw a weight up really fast, you have to brake really hard on the way down.
That is the secondary mechanism. High-velocity concentric movements require high-velocity eccentric decelerations to stop the joint from hyperextending.
And that rapid braking induces the microtrauma necessary for growth.
Exactly. The conclusion is that effort, velocity, and fatigue are the true drivers of adaptation, not just the static mass of the iron.
So we know that to change the body, we have to push it to unfamiliar fatigue.
Nah.
But here is the problem with adaptation.
What's that?
If I lift 30% to fatigue today, next month, that same weight won't cause fatigue anymore. My body will have adapted. How do we structure the progression so we don't just plateau forever?
This introduces the most fundamental law of physical conditioning, progressive overload.
It sounds intimidating. Progressive overload.
It simply means that biological homeostasis is the enemy of progress. The body only adapts when it encounters a stress it is not equipped to handle.
Right.
Once it builds the tissue to handle that stress, it will stop adapting. To force continuous change, you must systematically and periodically increase the workload. You must continuously introduce a novel stress.
But the sources lay out a very strict, conservative rule for how to apply this overload safely. You can't just go into the gym and add 50 pounds to the bar because you feel good that day.
No, definitely not. The clinical mandate is only modify one volume factor at a time. Never change the weight, the repetitions, and the rest periods all in the same session.
Walk me through a safe progression. Let's say my current capacity is doing 3 sets of 10 repetitions on the leg press with 100 pounds.
Okay, if you want to overload the tissue safely, you first manipulate the repetitions. You keep the weight exactly at 100 pounds, but you push the sets to 12 repetitions.
And I stay there for a bit.
You stay there for a week or two until your nervous system and connective tissue adapt to that new duration of stress.
Once 12 reps feels manageable, then I add the weight.
Yes, but when you increase the absolute load, say, bumping it to 110 pounds, you must drop the repetitions back down.
You change the weight, so you reset the volume.
Exactly. You would drop back to 3 sets of 8 reps at 110 pounds. Then, over the next few weeks, you slowly build those reps back up to 12.
It's a stair-step approach. You are slowly creeping up on the nervous system so it doesn't panic and break down.
If you drastically increase the weight and the reps simultaneously, you exceed the structural integrity of the tendons, which adapt much slower than muscle bellies.
And that leads to severe tendinopathy or joint injury.
Exactly. Furthermore, from a clinical tracking standpoint, if you change 3 variables at once and the client improves, you have no scientific idea which variable actually caused the adaptation.
To manage this long-term, the sources introduce periodization, the long game, organizing these incremental overloads into massive multi-month cycles.
Periodization is key.
And they contrast linear versus nonlinear periodization. What is happening biologically with these two strategies?
Linear periodization is the traditional model used by Olympic athletes. It involves a progressive increase in intensity of the weight, while simultaneously decreasing the reps over a period of many weeks or months.
So in January, I am doing sets of 15 reps with very light weight, building endurance and connective tissue strength.
Right.
By March, I am doing sets of 8 reps with medium weight. And by May, peaking for a competition, I am doing sets of 3 reps with massive heavy weight.
Correct. It is a straight, predictable line driving toward a single peak performance.
But there's a catch.
The limitation of linear periodization, however, is that the body is remarkably predictive. If the stress increases in a perfectly straight line, the nervous system anticipates it and can sometimes downregulate receptor sensitivity, leading to a plateau.
It gets bored of the predictable math. So how does nonlinear or undulating periodization trick the body?
Nonlinear periodization involves wildly varying the intensity and volume within the exact same week or 14-day microcycle. It is metabolic chaos by design.
So Monday, I might do heavy sets of 4 reps for strength. Wednesday, I come in and do light sets of 20 reps for endurance. Friday, I do moderate sets of 10 for hypertrophy.
Exactly. You are constantly providing vastly differing neurological and metabolic stimuli. The body never settles into a predictable homeostasis.
It's always guessing.
Yeah, it constantly has to scramble to synthesize different types of enzymes and recruit different fiber types. The clinical data strongly suggests that for long-term clients, this undulating model prevents neural fatigue and shows superior long-term results compared to a straight linear progression.
Now, all of this complex math, the periodization, the exact percentages of weight, the tempos, completely worthless if the biomechanics of the movement are garbage.
Oh, absolutely. Form is everything.
And the sources provided this incredible section, table 7.12. Common design and execution faults. It's basically a clinical breakdown of all the disastrous movements you see people doing in the gym every day.
It's a great table.
I want to play the role of the observer, sitting on a bench, watching the gym floor. I'm going to describe a movement, and I want you to clinically diagnose why it is a biomechanical disaster.
I will gladly be the resident biomechanist.
Okay, first guy. He's sitting on the lat pull-down machine. He's got a massive amount of weight pinned. He grabs the incredibly wide bar, and he's violently pulling it down behind his neck, yanking his head forward every time.
Ah, the behind the neck pull down. This is a relic from 1980s bodybuilding magazines, and it is an orthopedic nightmare.
What's the main issue?
The issue here is glenohumeral mobility. To safely pull a bar behind your cervical spine, your shoulder joint requires an extreme degree of external rotation, which the vast majority of the population simply does not possess.
So because their shoulders can't rotate that far back, the body borrows the mobility from somewhere else to get the bar down.
Yes, the body compensates. To force the bar behind the head, the client violently juts their cervical spine forward, crushing the discs in their neck. Simultaneously, because the shoulder is restricted, the lower back, the lumbar spine is forced into extreme lordosis.
Lordosis meaning sway back. They are aggressively arching their lower back.
They are compressing the lumbar discs while impinging the rotator cuff tendons in the shoulder. It is an injury waiting to happen.
What's the fix?
Pulling the bar down in front of the face to the top of the sternum allows the scapula to move naturally, protects the neck, and actually results in superior activation of the latissimus dorsi muscle.
Okay, next gym fail. Someone is in the squat rack. They read online that if you don't squat ass to grass, it doesn't count.
I know where this is going.
So they have a heavy barbell on their back, and they are dropping super deep, going all the way down until their hamstrings are resting on their calves. But something at the bottom looks, well, weird.
The super deep squat. While squatting deep is fantastic for athletes who have the anatomical structure for it, forcing a deep squat on a rigid body is disastrous.
What am I observing at the bottom?
What you are observing is likely posterior pelvic tilt.
The butt wink.
Yeah.
As they get below parallel, their tailbone suddenly tucks underneath them.
Exactly. When a lifter exhausts the mobility in their hip capsule and their ankles, the body still wants to descend, so the pelvis rotates backward to artificially create more depth.
Why is that dangerous?
The danger is that the pelvis is attached to the lumbar spine. When the pelvis violently tucks under, the lower spine is forced to round out. It enters spinal flexion.
And a rounded lower back with 200 pounds of iron sitting on your shoulders?
Creates monumental shear force on the intervertebral discs. The fluid inside the disc is pushed backward toward the spinal cord, risking a severe herniation.
Yikes.
The absolute clinical rule is that the spine must maintain a neutral, braced position. The moment the pelvis rotates and the spine flexes, the squat has gone too deep for that specific client's anatomical limit.
Okay, one more. The triceps kickback. Someone is leaning over a bench, holding a tiny dumbbell, and extending their arms straight back behind them. But they're tired, so their elbow has dropped way down by their ribs, and they're basically just swinging the weight back and forth.
If the elbow drops below the horizontal plane of the torso, the physics of the lever system entirely evaporate. We have to look at gravity vectors.
Gravity pulls straight down toward the floor.
Right. The entire purpose of a kickback is to force the triceps to extend the elbow against that downward pull.
So if my upper arm is parallel to the floor, my triceps have to fight gravity for almost 90 degrees of motion to lock the arm out straight.
Correct. You have maximum mechanical tension. But if you drop your elbow down so your upper arm is pointing toward the floor, the arc of the dumbbell's movement changes.
For a large portion of the movement, the dumbbell is simply swinging horizontally like a pendulum on a grandfather clock.
Exactly. Gravity isn't resisting horizontal movement. The triceps lose the mechanical tension, and the exercise becomes an elaborate, useless swinging motion. The elbow must remain pinned high to force the muscle to work against the downward vector of gravity.
It's all just physics, levers, and torque. But before we look at how to build a custom program using all these tools, we have to talk about how to prepare the body for this trauma, the warm-up and cool-down.
And once again, the science here has evolved drastically from what we were taught in high school gym class.
How so?
The evolution here is vital. The traditional dogma was to walk into the gym, sit on the cold floor, grab your toes, and hold a static stretch for 30 seconds before lifting heavy weights.
Right.
The clinical data now explicitly warns against this for strength and power athletes.
Why? Isn't stretching good for you?
Flexibility is good, but pre-workout static stretching physically elongates the muscle and tendon tissue, temporarily reducing its elastic properties.
Remember the rubber band analogy?
Yes, if you stretch a rubber band out and hold it there for a long time, it loses its violent snap. Static stretching before lifting actually decreases maximum force output and power production.
So if I'm trying to jump high or lift heavy, I am actively making myself weaker by sitting and stretching my hamstrings.
Yeah.
What is the clinical alternative?
Dynamic warm-ups. The goal is to raise tissue temperature and wake up the central nervous system without permanently elongating the tissue.
So moving around.
This involves actively moving the joints through their full ranges of motion using near maximal muscular actions, high knees, bounding, active lunges.
The sources mention a specific neurological phenomenon triggered by dynamic warm-ups. Post-activation potentiation? Wait, post-activation potentiation is a massive, dense phrase. What is actually happening in my nervous system when I do a dynamic warm-up?
Let's break it down to the cellular level. When you perform a heavy, explosive, dynamic movement, like a few vertical jumps or a light, fast medicine ball throw, your brain sends a massive electrical signal to the muscle fibers.
Okay.
This electrical signal causes calcium ions to flood into the muscle cells. Calcium is the key that unlocks the actin and myosin cross bridges we discussed earlier.
So the muscle is flooded with the chemical it needs to contract.
Exactly. The cell becomes hypersensitive to calcium. For a brief window of time, maybe 10 to 15 minutes after the dynamic movement, the muscle fibers are biochemically primed.
So if I immediately go perform my heavy squat or my sprint within that window,
The muscle can generate force vastly faster and harder because it's already preloaded with calcium. That is post-activation potentiation. It is literally hacking the nervous system for an immediate temporary strength increase.
that is incredible. And what about the cool down? Is that when we bring back the old school toe touches?
Yes, the cool down is the appropriate time for long-duration static stretching. After the session, the muscles are inflamed and physically shortened from thousands of concentric contractions.
So you stretch them back out.
Static stretching helps realign the collagen fibers, relieves the acute tightness, particularly in postural muscles, and begins the parasympathetic nervous system's recovery process.
Right. We have covered the vocabulary, the tools, the architecture, the intensity paradigm shift, the overload rules, the biomechanics, and the neurological warm-ups. We have the entire 8-step clinical model.
We covered a lot of ground.
Now let's put it to the test. Let's look at how all these scientific variables combine to create completely custom-tailored results for two human beings who couldn't be more different. The sources give us two fascinating case studies. Let's start with Profile 1, Ranjiv.
Ranjiv is a 16-year-old high school lacrosse athlete coming in for a comprehensive off-season conditioning program.
Looking at his profile, his specific goals are entirely athletic. He needs to develop lower body power, he needs to be able to accelerate past defenders, change directions on a dime, and he needs the metabolic conditioning to maintain this explosive speed deep into the third period of a grueling game.
So we apply the overarching law of the entire model. Specificity. What are the specific demands of lacrosse?
Not just lifting heavy stuff.
Right. Lacrosse doesn't require lifting 500 pounds slowly. It requires absolute chaos, speed, and elasticity. Therefore, Ranjiv's prescription heavily features complex training and plyometrics.
Looking at his chart, I don't see a lot of heavy leg press machines. I see exercises like depth jumps from a 12 to 18-inch box, scissor jumps, and cross-country ski alternating single leg bounds.
We need to analyze why those specific movements were chosen. By prescribing depth jumps, we are directly attacking the stretch shortening cycle.
Okay.
When he steps off the box and hits the ground, his nervous system is forced to handle a massive, rapid, eccentric deceleration. He has to break his body weight instantly and immediately explode upward.
Hitting the brakes and slamming the gas without losing the elastic heat.
Exactly. This trains his Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindles to fire incredibly fast. The single leg bounds and lateral side hops train specific three-dimensional movement patterns required to dodge a defender.
The mechanical weight is low, it's just his body weight. But the neurological intensity and the velocity are off the charts.
He is taking advantage of the high-velocity concentric adaptations we discussed earlier to recruit those type 2 fast-twitch fibers.
It's all about speed of force. Now, let's contrast Ranjiv's explosive chaos with Profile 2, Michael. Michael is 38 years old. He is an office worker who sits at a computer all day, and he is an absolute beginner with zero motor knowledge of resistance training.
Michael's biological needs are the polar opposite of Ranjiv's. His goals are general cardiovascular conditioning and, most importantly, extreme postural correction.
Bad desk posture.
Years of sitting at a desk have given him internally rounded shoulders and lumbar lordosis that sway back posture. Furthermore, the reality of his life is that he only has 40 to 45 minutes on his lunch break to work out.
So what is the clinical prescription for the time-crunched, desk-bound beginner with bad posture?
The model prescribes a highly structured, modified circuit using exclusively variable resistance machines, the equipment with the kidney bean cans we discussed, and an inflatable exercise ball.
Why restrict him to machines when we just talked about how free weights build better functional stabilizers?
Because of his novice motor knowledge, Michael doesn't know how to brace his spine or track his knees yet. If we give him chaotic free weights, his nervous system will be completely overwhelmed just trying to balance, and his risk of injury skyrockets. The machines provide a locked, guided path of safety, allowing him to push his muscles to the requisite fatigue without worrying about a dumbbell falling on his face.
And the circuit format solves his time problem.
Yes. Moving from machine to machine with only 30 seconds of rest keeps his heart rate elevated, providing the general cardiovascular conditioning he requested in a highly condensed time frame.
But the most fascinating part is how the exercise selection directly attacks his desk posture. The chart specifically prescribes seated rows and lat pull-downs with an explicit note to actively squeeze the scapulae together.
This is where exercise selection becomes purely medicinal. What causes rounded shoulders? It is a tug of war where one side is winning.
The front side.
Yeah. Years of typing have caused the muscles in his chest and anterior shoulders to become chronically short, tight, and overactive. Simultaneously, the muscles in his upper back, the rhomboids, and the lower trapezius have become stretched, weak, and dormant.
His chest is pulling his shoulders forward, and his back is too weak to pull them back.
Precisely. To fix the structural imbalance, we isolate the exact weak links. By prescribing seated rows on a machine and forcing him to aggressively squeeze his shoulder blades, the scapulae, together, we are neurologically waking up the rhomboids.
We are strengthening the specific tissues required to physically pull his posture upright against the tension of his chest.
Exactly.
And what about the abdominal crunches on the unstable exercise ball?
That directly attacks the lumbar lordosis. The deep curve in his lower back is exacerbated by a weak core. By putting him on a wobbly exercise ball, we force the deep spinal stabilizers and the transverse abdominis to fire relentlessly just to keep him from falling off.
So it's a low mechanical load, high neurological demand exercise that stabilizes his pelvis, eventually allowing his spine to return to a neutral position.
It is. It is an entirely different universe from Rangiv's explosive depth jumps, yet both programs were meticulously constructed from the exact same 8 foundational steps of the clinical model.
It proves just how literal and adaptable the human body is if you feed it the right specific data.
It demonstrates that resistance training is not a blunt instrument of simply lifting heavy things. It is a highly precise biological programming language.
So, to synthesize this massive physiological journey we've been on, we started at the microscopic level, understanding how actin and myosin filaments generate force, and how the eccentric braking phase causes the microtrauma we feel as soreness.
Right.
We realized that the gym floor tribal war between free weights and machines is totally missing the point. It's simply about picking the right tool for the neurological cost you are willing to pay, whether that is the stabilizing chaos of a dumbbell, the perfect strength curve mapping of a cam pulley, or the inertia-free safety of a pneumatic air compressor.
Yes.
We learned that the architecture of the workout, understanding reciprocal inhibition in supersets, and the physics of the stretch-shortening cycle completely dictates the outcome.
And perhaps the most vital revelation is the absolute paradigm shift regarding intensity. The clinical proof that the physical weight of the iron is secondary.
That lifting 30% of your maximum to the point of absolute voluntary fatigue recruits the exact same high-threshold motor units and builds the exact same muscle tissue as risking your joints under an 80% load.
The effort, the speed, and the fatigue are what the body actually measures.
We have to force the body out of homeostasis through progressive overload, changing one tiny variable at a time, while rigorously defending our biomechanics against the disasters of rounded spines and dropped elbows.
The ultimate takeaway for the listener is empowerment. The human machine is resilient, but it requires a specific, intentional prescription. You cannot just guess. Knowledge of the underlying physiology is the only way to achieve the exact adaptation you desire.
We've seen today that muscle fibers only grow, they only adapt and synthesize new tissue when they are pushed to the very edge of unfamiliar fatigue or forced to negotiate a novel, unpredictable mechanical stress.
Absolutely.
The body requires chaos to grow. If that is the fundamental biological law of physical growth, how might that exact same principle of progressive overload apply to how we build our cognitive abilities or our emotional resilience? Are we designing complex, undulating circuits to challenge our minds, pushing our brains to unfamiliar neurological fatigue? Or are we just lifting the exact same comfortable mental weights every single day, wondering why we aren't changing?